The quiet passenger in 1A journey begins quietly. The cabin of Flight 759 from San Francisco to Zurich hummed with a low, steady rhythm as passengers filed into their seats. The plush first-class section gleamed with polished wood, leather recliners, and soft amber lighting. It was the domain of CEOs, celebrities, and diplomats, those accustomed to privilege, comfort, and attention. Among them, a man quietly stepped into seat 1A. No entourage, no flashy watch, no designer logos. Just a simple black jacket, charcoal slacks, and a neatly trimmed beard. Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google and Alphabet, adjusted his glasses and tucked his laptop bag carefully beneath the seat. Few passengers recognized him. Those who did, mostly tech industry insiders, whispered quietly and with awe. But for the majority of the cabin crew, he was simply another first-class traveler. And for one particular flight attendant, Ms. Rachel, he was an invisible man. Rachel was young, ambitious, and deeply proud of her position on international flights. To her, first class was her stage, and she played the role of gatekeeper with fervor. She quickly assessed each passenger not by merit or humility, but by perceived status. The luxury watches, the designer suits, the celebrities whose names trended on social media. When she glanced at Sundar, her mind made its snap judgment. Plain clothes, no stylist, no jewelry, no entourage. He must have been upgraded, maybe a professor or a consultant, not one of the important ones. And so her attitude was cool, if not dismissive. The first slight as passengers settled in, Rachel circulated to offer pre-departure drinks. "Champagne for you, Mr. Brighton." She smiled at the hedge fund manager in 1B. "Ah, yes. The 2008. Dom. Thank you, dear," Brighton replied smoothly. When she reached Sundar, her tone changed. "What would you like to drink, sir?" Rachel asked with thin politeness, eyes barely meeting his. "Just some water, thank you," Sundar replied softly. She nodded, then turned away sharply before he could say another word. She returned several minutes later with bottled water, handed it wordlessly, and immediately shifted her attention elsewhere. Sundar, ever the quiet observer, said nothing. He pulled out his tablet and began reviewing notes for an upcoming conference on artificial intelligence and sustainability, a topic he was deeply passionate about. But the micro-humiliation hadn't gone unnoticed by nearby passengers, including Mr. Brighton, who smirked at Sundar as if they shared some unspoken hierarchy. Whispers behind closed curtains. While the flight ascended, Rachel and another attendant, Mark, whispered near the galley. "Who's the guy in 1A?" Mark asked. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Some random business guy who got bumped up. No style. He even asked for water." Mark glanced down the aisle. "Looks familiar, though." "Please. If he was important, I'd know. Brighton's here. Now that's someone." Rachel's tone was laced with quiet arrogance, as though it was her job to decide who deserved respect. What Rachel didn't know, what she hadn't bothered to check, was that Sundar Pichai had personally met with multiple world leaders, had overseen breakthroughs in AI, quantum computing, and global internet expansion, that his humility was not an absence of status, but a reflection of profound internal strength. And as fate would have it, this flight was about to put Sundar's quiet resilience to a test far beyond Rachel's imagination. The turbulence, 2 hours. Into the flight somewhere over Greenland, the cabin shook unexpectedly. An announcement buzzed overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence." Rachel hurried to secure loose items while Mark stabilized a drink cart that had nearly toppled. In 1A, Sundar calmly secured his seatbelt and resumed his reading, unfazed. But Rachel, still frazzled, approached him again, this time to criticize. "Sir, I need you to fully stow that tablet now," she said sharply. "I will as soon as I finish." "Saving my work." "Just a few seconds," Sundar replied respectfully. "I said now, sir." "This is for your safety," Rachel snapped, drawing attention from nearby passengers. Several first-class travelers turned to watch. Brighton, again, smirked, as though enjoying a schoolteacher scolding a pupil. Sundar calmly complied. "Of course, it's done." Rachel gave a curt nod, her eyes revealing mild contempt. She walked away, her mind replaying the moment as if she had asserted dominance over someone beneath her. The VIP surprise. Just as the plane stabilized, the pilot's voice crackled through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we're privileged to have on board today one of the world's leading technology innovators, Mr. Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google and Alphabet, who's traveling to Zurich for the Global Sustainability Summit. The words hit Rachel like a lightning bolt. Her face froze. She turned slowly towards seat 1A where Sundar sat quietly, offering a humble nod of acknowledgement to polite claps from other passengers. Brighton's face twisted awkwardly, his earlier smugness dissolving into visible discomfort. Rachel's hands trembled slightly. Her entire mental framework cracked. This man, the man I just dismissed, condescended to, and openly belittled, is one of the most respected figures in the world. Mark glanced at Rachel with wide eyes. Told you he looked familiar. The inner collapse for the next hour, Rachel's mind raced. Embarrassment, regret, and shame washed over her in waves. She replayed every interaction, the cold greeting, the dismissive tone, the public scolding, and saw herself not as a professional but as shallow and judgmental. How could I have been so blind? Mark whispered quietly. You might want to apologize. Rachel shook her head, her pride grappling with her guilt. I don't know what to say. Start with, I'm sorry, Mark replied simply. But Rachel wasn't ready. Her ego clashed with her conscience. After all, her entire identity was built on reading people, knowing who to impress. And she had failed. Miserably. What Rachel didn't know was that the real test of character was just beginning. And for Sundar Pichai, this flight would become much more than a humiliating encounter. It would become an unexpected opportunity to demonstrate the power of grace, humility, and leadership. The apology that never came. The shift in the air. The announcement of Sundar Pichai's presence had changed the entire atmosphere in first class. Rachel noticed it instantly. The same passengers who had ignored Sundar earlier were now stealing glances at him with new eyes. Eyes filled with curiosity, admiration, even reverence. The hedge fund manager, Brighton, who had previously smirked with superiority, now looked uneasy. His posture stiffened, his earlier arrogance replaced with awkward silence. Rachel kept busy, far busier than necessary, checking on other passengers, rearranging napkins that didn't need rearranging, adjusting headrests that were already perfect. She was desperate to avoid eye contact with 1A, but inside her mind was chaos. I judged him so quickly. I dismissed him just because he didn't fit the image of power I was used to. What kind of person does that make me? The whisper chain as the plane glided through calm skies once more, murmurs traveled through the cabin. One couple leaned toward each other. Did you hear? That's Sundar Pichai. Yes, the Google guy, whispered the husband. He's worth billions. And he's so humble, added the wife. I would have never guessed. Look how quiet he is. Rachel heard every whisper. The shame gnawed deeper. Her earlier arrogance felt like heavy chains around her ankles now. Each step she took down the aisle felt heavier than the last. A deeper reflection in the small crew galley. Rachel leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, her hands trembling. Mark noticed and approached quietly. Are you okay? No, I'm not, she whispered back. It happens, Rachel. You misread the situation. No. She shook her head, voice cracking. I didn't just misread. I made him feel small because of my own pride. I decided he didn't matter because he didn't look important. That wasn't a mistake. That was ugly. Mark placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. We all have moments that test us. What matters is how you respond after. Rachel wiped her eyes quickly. I don't even know if he noticed. Oh, he noticed, Mark said softly. But the way he's carried himself, that's real class. Rachel exhaled sharply, a painful realization blossoming within her. He's teaching me more about character than any of my trainers ever did. An unexpected conversation. A few hours later, as dinner service began, Rachel finally gathered the courage to approach Sundar directly. She straightened her uniform, rehearsed her words silently, and stepped toward 1A. But as she arrived, she was caught off guard. Sundar looked up with a warm, gentle smile. "Good evening," he said softly. "You seem very busy." Rachel swallowed hard. His kindness made it even harder. "Yes, sir. I just wanted to say—" She hesitated. The words tangled in her throat. Her rehearsed speech evaporated. "I hope you're having a comfortable flight," she finally managed. Sundar nodded kindly. "I am, thank you." For a moment their eyes met. There was no anger, no bitterness in his gaze, only warmth and patience. It disarmed her entirely. She started again, her voice lowering into a whisper. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Pichai." Sundar's eyes twinkled slightly. "For what?" For not treating you as I should have earlier. She paused. "I was disrespectful, and I deeply regret it." Sundar studied her, his face calm and composed. "Rachel, right?" "Yes, sir." "You don't need to carry that burden. We all have moments where our assumptions get ahead of us." Rachel's throat tightened. She hadn't expected such grace. "But it still wasn't right," she added, her voice cracking. "What matters," Sundar continued gently, "is that you recognized it, and you had the courage to face it. That's rare." His words were not only kind, they were liberating. Rachel felt tears rising but managed to blink them back. "Thank you, sir." He smiled again. "I've been where you are. Many times." Those words surprised her. Sundar Pichai, humbled. "When I first came to the United States," he continued, "I barely owned anything. My first flight was overwhelming. My accent, my clothes, my appearance, people made assumptions about me constantly. But I learned that dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you hold inside." Rachel's breath caught. The CEO of one of the world's biggest companies sharing this with her, a flight attendant. "That's why I try to treat everyone I meet with kindness," he said softly. "Because you never know their story." For a moment, Rachel stood frozen in awe of his humility. "I'll remember that, Mr. Pichai," she whispered. "I hope you will," Sundar replied with gentle encouragement. The shift in Rachel's harder. The rest of the flight, Rachel served Sundar with quiet respect. Not out of guilt anymore, but from genuine admiration. She noticed every small kindness he extended to others, thanking every crew member, helping an elderly woman adjust her seat, even offering his dessert to a child in the neighboring row whose meal had been mixed up. This is true power, Rachel thought. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that uplifts others. Her entire view of success, of status, of worthiness was being rewritten in real time. The bigger storm ahead. But what neither Rachel nor Sundar knew was that this brief encounter was just the beginning. Waiting at the Zurich airport was a scandal, a brewing media frenzy. Unfounded allegations had been published just hours before the flight. An anonymous source claiming Sundar had manipulated Google's AI division for personal gain. Headlines were exploding. Journalists were gathering at the terminal. Cameras were flashing. His integrity, the very thing he carried so dearly, was under attack. Rachel, blissfully unaware, was about to witness how Sundar's grace and humility would be tested on a global stage far beyond. A first-class cabin, and she would soon find herself pulled into the storm in a way she never expected. The scandal unfolds. Arrival in Zurich. A shocking welcome as Flight 759 descended through the pale morning clouds over Zurich. The passengers in first class began preparing for landing. Rachel was calmer now, having had her moment of humility with Sundar Pichai. The awkwardness between them had quietly dissolved into mutual understanding and respect. But outside the aircraft, the calm did not reflect what was waiting. Journalists crowded behind barricades. Cameramen positioned themselves strategically along the arrival gate. Television reporters rehearsed their live feeds. Flashbulbs were tested. Microphones extended like eager arms, ready to capture every word. The breaking headlines had spread, like wildfire overnight. Anonymous sources accused Sundar Pichai of AI ethics violations. Google CEO under fire. The accusations were vague but damaging enough to spark controversy. Media outlets, hungry for clicks and sensationalism, latched onto the story, spinning theories faster than facts could catch up. Sundar, still unaware of the full extent, quietly gathered his belongings after landing. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Rachel noticed Mark's puzzled face as he scrolled his phone behind the galley curtain. "What's wrong?" she asked. Mark held out his phone, showing her the headline. Rachel's heart dropped. Her eyes shot instinctively toward 1A, where Sundar sat peacefully. He didn't know. Not yet. The first sign says. The doors opened. Sundar stepped out of the cabin, with his usual grace, but instantly he was greeted by an aggressive wall of cameras and shouted questions. "Mr. Pichai, are you stepping down? Did you personally authorize the AI project? Is it true you manipulated data for profit?" The chaos unfolded like a tidal wave. Sundar paused briefly, taking it all in, but did not flinch. He gave a polite nod and continued walking toward the awaiting security detail. Rachel stood by the door, watching in stunned silence. How can someone stay so calm, she wondered. His world may be crashing, and yet... But this was not the first time Sundar Pichai faced storms. His entire life had been a series of uphill battles: poverty, immigrant struggles, professional pressure, global scrutiny. Every trial had taught him one invaluable skill: composure. A private storm hours later, Sundar sat inside the secured conference suite at Zurich's Grand Palace Hotel. Lawyers, PR teams, and trusted executives filled the room. The mood was tense. "These accusations are baseless," Sundar said calmly. "Fabrications designed to damage trust." His general counsel nodded. "Agreed, but the court of public opinion moves faster than facts, sir. We're already seeing stock fluctuations." "Have we identified the source of the leak?" Sundar asked. "Not yet, but our investigators are tracing it back to a disgruntled former engineer. He was dismissed last year after violating security protocols." Sundar remained still, and yet his words now hold more power than the truth. His communications director, Maria, chimed in. "We need a public response, Mr. Pichai. Silence will feed the narrative." Sundar nodded slowly. "We will respond, but with dignity, not defensiveness." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling softly. "This is bigger than me now," he thought. "It's about what kind of leadership I want to represent." The weight of the moment outside. The hotel, the media circus grew. Rachel, whose flight crew had a layover, wandered the city but couldn't stop thinking about him. She stared at news broadcasts, displayed in shop windows. His face was everywhere. Is Sundar Pichai's AI empire ethical? Whistleblower exposes shocking AI data manipulation. Silicon Valley CEO under investigation. The coverage was ruthless. Rachel's own guilt resurfaced. Just days ago, she had judged this man for not looking powerful enough. Now the world was trying to strip him of his dignity altogether. But unlike her initial mistake, this was not rooted in ignorance. It was deliberate malice. He deserved someone in his corner, she thought. Driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand, Rachel returned to the hotel lobby, where security and staff buzzed with activity. "I know this is unusual," she told the receptionist, "but can you please tell Mr. Pichai that Rachel, from Flight 759, is here? Just tell him I'm thinking of him." The receptionist hesitated but took the message. A lesson in strength. Inside the suite, as advisors debated strategy, an assistant quietly slipped Sundar the message. He read it, smiled faintly, and folded the note. Rachel's small gesture reminded him of something vital. Human decency still existed. Later that evening, as the team finalized the public statement, Sundar asked his communications director one question. Maria, do you believe leadership is shown in words or actions? She hesitated. Both, sir. He nodded. Then our response must reflect both. The statement. The next morning, Sundar stood before an ocean of cameras. His face was calm, his voice steady, his message surgical yet human. Good morning. I stand here not as a CEO desperate to protect my title, but as a leader who believes in transparency, integrity, and accountability. These allegations are serious and demand investigation, not speculation. I welcome an independent inquiry into our AI division. I have nothing to hide and everything to protect, the trust of billions of people who depend on our work. We will not fight falsehood with outrage, but with facts, patience, and dignity. Leadership is not about avoiding storms, but standing tall within them. He paused, letting the words breathe. In every challenge, I remind myself of something my father taught me back in Chennai. Respect isn't given by titles, Sundar. It's earned by character. He stepped back from the podium as flashes erupted. Global reaction. The speech went viral. News anchors, pundits, and public figures were stunned by its grace and power. Social media exploded. Masterclass in leadership. Dignity under fire. Sundar Pichai shows how it's done. One of the most powerful responses to a crisis I've ever seen. Even critics were forced to acknowledge his composure. As investigations began clearing his name within days, the accusations crumbled like paper in the rain. The engineer behind the allegations was exposed for fabricating evidence after a bitter dismissal. Sundar Pichai's integrity emerged stronger than ever. Rachel's epiphany, sitting alone in her small hotel room, Rachel watched it all unfold on her tablet. Tears welled in her eyes. He didn't fight back with rage. He didn't attack his accuser. He stood in truth, in grace, in leadership. She saw now how small her earlier humiliation of him truly was, and how much more profound his silent forgiveness had been. I thought power was dominance, she realized. But real power is peace. And yet Rachel's journey with Sundar was far from over. For fate was preparing one more unexpected meeting, one that would change both of their lives forever. The quiet rescue days. After the storm, the Zurich conference resumed, now with renewed admiration for Sundar Pichai. The investigation had cleared him. The world had seen not only his innocence but his grace. Executives from all over the world now approached him with deep respect, more than ever before. His quiet dignity had inspired even some of his competitors. But beneath it all, Sundar remained as he had always been, humble, steady, and thoughtful. As the conference sessions ended, one evening Sundar finally allowed himself a rare moment of solitude. He walked through the quiet streets of Zurich, breathing in the cool spring air. The sky was painted in shades of indigo and silver. The lakeside glistened beneath the moonlight. Despite the storm he had just weathered, a strange sense of peace filled him. But the night wasn't finished with him yet. The cry for help as Sundar rounded a quiet corner near an old cobblestone alley. He heard it, a sharp, panicked cry. Help! Please, someone help me! The voice was faint but desperate. Sundar's instincts kicked in immediately. He hurried toward the sound, navigating the narrow passageway, his breath quickening. There, in the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, stood a woman surrounded by two men. One held her purse while the other gestured threateningly. Give us the phone too, one of the men growled. I already gave you my bag, the woman pleaded. Sundar's eyes widened. It was Rachel. The intervention without hesitation. Sundar stepped forward. That's enough, he said firmly, his voice clear and steady. The two men spun around, surprised by his sudden appearance. But Sundar didn't waver. Walk away now, and nobody gets hurt, the taller man sneered. Old man, this doesn't concern you. I said, walk away. There was something in Sundar's tone, not aggression but absolute certainty. It was disarming. One of the men glanced at his partner, suddenly nervous. Come on, man, let's go. Too many cameras around here. They dropped the purse and bolted into the shadows. Rachel collapsed to her knees, shaken but unharmed. "The reunion, Sundar," she whispered, recognizing him instantly. He knelt beside her. "Are you all right?" Tears streamed down Rachel's face as she nodded. I think so. I can't believe it's you." He gently helped her to her feet, retrieving her bag and checking her for any injuries. "What were you doing out here alone?" he asked softly. "My hotel was nearby," she said between sobs. "I took a wrong turn after dinner. I never imagined—" Her voice broke again. Sundar placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over now. You're safe." She stared at him, overwhelmed not just by his rescue but by the surreal twist of fate that had reunited them. A deeper conversation. Minutes later, sitting on a quiet park bench beneath the moonlit sky, they spoke honestly for the first time since that flight. Rachel wiped her eyes. "I feel like life keeps trying to teach me something, and I keep failing to learn it." Sundar listened carefully. "First, I judged you so wrongly on that flight," she continued, her voice breaking. "And even after I apologized, I carried guilt for days. I wanted to tell you how much your kindness changed me. But then this happened." Sundar smiled gently. "Sometimes life has strange ways of completing unfinished conversations." Rachel looked down. "I still don't understand how you stayed so calm through everything. The media attacks, the lies, the pressure, even tonight." Sundar leaned back, looking up at the stars. "Do you know what I used to think power was when I was young?" he asked. Rachel shook her head. "I thought it was money, titles, control, the usual things." He smiled faintly. "But after a while I realized, true power is peace under pressure. It's being able to face storms without losing your center." He paused, letting the words breathe. "Most people react. Few people respond. Reacting is impulsive. Responding is intentional." Rachel absorbed every word. "But how?" she asked quietly. "How do you find that peace?" Sundar's eyes softened. "By never forgetting where I came from." The story behind his calm. For the first time, Sundar shared with her parts of his life he rarely revealed to anyone. He spoke of growing up in a cramped two-room apartment in Chennai, of having no telephone for years and standing in long lines to use a neighbor's phone when needed, of studying by dim light during frequent power outages, of parents who sacrificed everything to send him abroad for education, even when they couldn't afford much. "But my parents always told me," Sundar said softly, "even if you have little, you can still give much: respect, kindness, dignity." He smiled. "I carried that into every boardroom, every headline, every accusation, because no matter how high you rise, the real test is whether you can stay grounded." Rachel wiped fresh tears from her eyes. "I wish the world could hear you say that." Sundar looked at her and said something that would stay with her forever. "You don't need a stage to live your values. The smallest place is enough to carry the greatest dignity." A new kind of gratitude. As the night wore on, Rachel felt an extraordinary transformation taking place inside her. For years, she had associated success with prestige, appearances, and superficial markers. She judged passengers by their watches, their shoes, their designer bags. But now, here she was, rescued not just physically but spiritually by the most powerful man she'd ever met, who needed none of those things to prove his worth. Her respect for Sundar was no longer based on his title. It was built on who he was. This is what leadership looks like, she realized. A decision is made. As Sundar walked her safely back to her hotel, Rachel made a quiet decision. Her days of judging people by appearances were over. Her career would no longer be about serving titles. It would be about serving people. But fate was not yet finished writing the story between Rachel and Sundar. Because in the days ahead, an unexpected opportunity would come, one that would forever alter Rachel's destiny and bring her face to face with the ultimate test of everything Sundar had taught her. The unseen test, a new beginning. 2 weeks passed since that unforgettable night in Zurich. Rachel had returned to San Francisco, but something fundamental within her had shifted. The encounter with Sundar Pichai had become more than a moment. It had become a personal revolution. She enrolled herself in leadership seminars, studied emotional intelligence, and read books Sundar had recommended that night, works on humility, servant leadership, and resilience. Every evening she journaled lessons from her flights, vowing never again to allow judgment to cloud her empathy. Her colleagues began noticing the change. "Rachel, you're different lately," Mark said one afternoon during a long-haul flight to Tokyo. "More centered," she smiled. "I've been learning from a very unlikely teacher." He chuckled. "Still thinking about that night?" "I'll always be thinking about it," she admitted. "That kind of wisdom, it sticks." Meanwhile, at Google headquarters at Google, Sundar Pichai quietly resumed his duties. His vindication had only strengthened his leadership standing. Employees who once viewed him as distant now saw him as a symbol of integrity. But Sundar was reflecting deeply too. The media scandal had taught him something unsettling about modern culture. How quickly people were judged, elevated or destroyed based on shallow information. The experience with Rachel lingered in his mind as well. Her initial judgment, her courageous apology, and ultimately her growth, had reminded him of how powerful personal transformation could. With the unexpected call one morning, Rachel received an email that stopped her heart. Subject: Leadership Diversity Fellowship Program. Google Executive Office Invitation. Confused, she opened it. "Dear Ms. Rachel Simmons, you have been nominated for consideration to join Google's new Diversity and Leadership Fellowship, an initiative designed to bring real-world frontline perspectives into executive mentorship. We believe your journey reflects the core values we wish to amplify. Your candidacy was personally recommended by Mr. Sundar Pichai. If interested, please contact us for the initial interview phase." Rachel read the email twice. Her hands trembled. This wasn't real. How could it be? Tears welled up. He remembered me. Not only had he remembered her, but he had lifted her name into an opportunity she never dreamed existed. The interview nervous, but determined, Rachel arrived at Google headquarters for her first interview. A panel of executives greeted her warmly, but she still felt out of place. They wore tailored suits she was used to wearing her flight uniform. They carried degrees from Ivy League schools. She carried a small leather-bound notebook filled with handwritten lessons she had scribbled since her night in Zurich. The lead interviewer, a woman named Priya, smiled kindly. "Rachel, your story has reached us through Mr. Pichai himself. Before we begin, let me say, your courage is what leadership is made of." Rachel exhaled softly, grateful for the gentle start. The interview wasn't about her resume, it was about her character. They asked, "Tell us a moment you failed in leadership. When did you recognize your own blind spots? How do you approach people who are different from you? What does dignity mean to you?" For each question, Rachel answered with raw honesty. She told them about Flight 759, about her misjudgment, about her humiliating assumptions, about Sundar's grace, and about how that night transformed not only how she treated people, but how she saw herself. When the interview ended, Priya stood up. "Rachel, we often select candidates based on what they know. You've shown us who you are, and that's far more powerful." The new role weeks later, Rachel received official word, accepted. Her new role wasn't technical. It wasn't glamorous, but it was revolutionary. She was assigned as an internal leadership development liaison, a bridge between corporate leadership and ground-level employees across the organization, helping executives understand the daily human experiences of people they rarely interacted with directly. She would travel between offices, speak to entry-level employees, and report their challenges, ideas, and morale directly to Google's leadership. She would help humanize one of the largest organizations on Earth. Her first mentor, Sundar Pichai himself. The first day walking into the CEO's private executive floor, Rachel's nerves danced wildly. The doors opened. Sundar stood, smiling. "Welcome, Rachel." Thank you for believing in me, she said, still feeling surreal. He gestured toward the window overlooking the vast Silicon Valley campus. I didn't believe in you, he corrected softly. I believed with you. She looked puzzled. There's a difference, he explained. Believing in someone is trusting their potential. Believing with someone means walking alongside them as they grow. Rachel's eyes welled again. You once told me, she whispered, that you stay calm by remembering where you came from. Sundar nodded. Well, Rachel continued, I'll never forget where I came from either. Not the mistakes I made, not the lessons I learned. They're part of who I am now. He smiled. Good. Never trade your story for someone else's version of success. The deeper purpose over the next few months, Rachel flourished in her new role. She listened to hundreds of employees, from janitors to junior coders to cafeteria workers. She documented their stories, their hopes, their concerns, and every month she presented those stories directly to Sundar in private sessions. In those meetings, Rachel learned even more about Sundar's leadership philosophy. Listen more than you speak. See people before titles. Lead with patience, not ego. Fight problems, not people. In one meeting, Sundar shared something deeply personal. When my father worked for the British conglomerate in India, he said, he was just a manager. But every evening when we walked home together, he treated every person we passed with respect. The tea seller, the rickshaw driver, the security guard. Sundar smiled at the memory. That's when I first saw what true leadership looked like. Rachel nodded. That's what you're teaching me too. The test approaches. But as Rachel's star quietly rose inside Google, so too did whispers of envy and skepticism from some inside the organization. Certain executives questioned Sundar's decision to bring in someone without credentials. Others viewed Rachel's position as symbolic rather than strategic. 1. Senior VP even confronted her privately. You're here because Mr. Pichai likes you, not because you belong. Rachel stared at him, steady. The old Rachel would have shrunk. But not this version. I'm here because I listened when I could have judged, because I grew when I could have resisted, and because I learned when I could have blamed. The VP scoffed and walked away. Rachel stood her ground and silently thanked Sundar for preparing her for this moment. The storm looms, but darker challenges loomed ahead. An internal crisis was building, one that would soon put both Rachel's growth and Sundar's leadership to the ultimate test. It would involve an internal AI ethics dilemma, one where public trust, employee unrest, and the future of Google's leadership would hang in the balance. And for the first time, Rachel would find herself not simply learning from Sundar, but standing beside him, helping lead through a storm that could redefine both their legacies. The ultimate test of leadership, the brewing storm months had passed since Rachel began working alongside Sundar Pichai. Google was thriving, but beneath its glittering success, a dangerous ethical dilemma had begun to surface. One of Google's experimental AI divisions, Project Argo, had developed a revolutionary predictive algorithm capable of anticipating consumer behavior with frightening precision. Its accuracy could allow companies to predict personal decisions days, even weeks, before individuals made them. For marketers, this was gold. For regulators, it was dangerous. For Sundar, it was deeply troubling. As reports of internal leaks and growing external scrutiny emerged, Sundar summoned his inner circle for an emergency executive meeting. And for the first time, Rachel was seated at the table, not as an observer, but as a trusted voice. The room fell silent as Sundar entered. The private debate. Our algorithm, began Argo's lead engineer, is decades ahead of anything out there. The datasets are secure, and the models are clean. We can control how it's used. But should we control it? Sundar interrupted softly, his voice steady but sharp. Tuing, engineer hesitated. This could generate billions in revenue, added another senior executive. If we don't deploy it, Our competitors will. Rachel watched quietly. She had never seen such high-stakes discussions unfold. Money is not our metric, Sundar replied. Trust is. But our board, I'm not here to please stockholders at the expense of humanity, Sundar said firmly. Rachel finally spoke. Sir, may I say something? Every head turned toward her, some skeptical, some curious. Sundar nodded. Please. Rachel's voice was calm but passionate. I didn't grow up in Silicon Valley. I wasn't born into privilege. I served people for years in the skies, all kinds of people, rich, poor, powerful, powerless. And I learned something. Power is frightening when it's used to anticipate people's decisions before they even make them. She paused, gathering her thoughts. We cannot strip people of the most sacred thing they have, their right to choose. Even if our competitors would do it. Leadership is not following the race. It's setting the course. Sundar nodded deeply. Well said. The global leak, but just as internal debate raged, an even bigger crisis unfolded. A rogue engineer leaked documents about Project Argo to international media. Within hours, headlines exploded worldwide. Google's new AI predicts human behavior. Privacy advocates alarmed. Digital manipulation or innovation. The ethics of predictive AI. Governments demanded hearings. Advocacy groups staged protests outside Google campuses. Social media turned into a war zone. And worst of all, Google's public trust was suddenly under siege again. The world watches as Sundar prepared to address the world. Rachel found him alone in his office the night before the press conference. He sat at his desk, the city lights glowing outside his window, deep in thought. Rachel entered quietly. You okay, sir? He smiled gently. The storm never stops, Rachel. It only changes form. She sat across from him. You once told me to stay grounded by remembering where I came from. Sundar looked up. I remember. Well, Rachel said softly, don't forget where you're standing now either. You're not alone. Her. Words settled in his chest like armor. After a long silence, he spoke quietly. Do you know why I brought you into this program, Rachel? She shook her head. Because you carry something many leaders forget after too much success. Empathy. You remind me that data without humanity is meaningless. Tears welled in her eyes. You taught me that, sir. The historic speech. The following morning, Sundar stepped onto the global stage once again, this time before governments, regulators, employees, and billions of people watching online. Ladies and gentlemen, today, I stand not just as CEO, but as a citizen of this world responsible for the tools we create. Technology's greatest threat is not what it can do. It's what we might allow it to do without wisdom. Project Argo could bring innovation, yes, but it also risks violating something sacred, our personal freedom to think, decide, and choose. Therefore, today I announce that Google will immediately suspend development on Argo's predictive modules pending full independent ethical review. We will not release any technology we cannot morally defend, even if others do. He paused. We are not here to be first. We are here to be right. The audience sat breathless. Journalists scrambled for words. Social media erupted with praise. A masterclass in responsible leadership. Sundar Pichai saves Silicon Valley from itself. Leadership that sees beyond profit. Private victory that evening, back in his office, Sundar sat with Rachel once more. You changed the outcome of all this, Rachel, he said softly. She shook her head. You always had the answer. I just reminded you of what was already there. He smiled. Leadership is not about always having the answers, he said. It's about surrounding yourself with those who bring light to your blind spots. Rachel smiled through happy tears. The closing lesson as Rachel left the office that night, she stood outside the building, looking up at the massive illuminated Google sign. The journey from humiliating a quiet passenger on Flight 759 to standing beside him at the highest levels of leadership had changed her forever. Her mistakes had become her wisdom. Her failures had become her strength. Her humility had become her power. And as the wind swept gently across the campus, she whispered to herself, "Real leadership is not climbing over people. It's lifting them."